Please let us go, kind Maxim, begged Turban and Myshlayevsky, gazing beseechingly at Maxim with blood-stained faces. Go on, Max, wallop him, shouted the excited boys from behind. That'll teach him to beat up a junior. Oh God, the sunshine, noise and bustling of that day. And Maxim had been very different from this white-haired, hunched and famished old man. In those days Maxim's hair had been as thick and strong as a black boot brush, scarcely touched with a few threads of gray. Maxim's hands had been as strong as a pair of steel pincers, and round his neck he had worn a medallion the size of a wagon wheel. Yes, the wheel of fate had gone on rolling from village. A, making X number of turns on the way. And it had never reached village B but had landed up in a stony void. God, it was cold. Now they had to defend. But defend what? A void? The sound of footsteps? Can you save this doomed building, Tsar Alexander, with all the regiments of Borodino? Why don't you come alive and lead them down from the canvas? They'd smash Petley, you're all right. Turban's legs took him downstairs of their own volition. He wanted to shout Maxim, but he hesitated and then finally stopped. He imagined Maxim down below in the janitor's quarters in the basement, probably sitting huddled over his stove. Either he would have forgotten the old days, or he would burst into tears. And things were bad enough without that. To hell with the idea, sentimental rubbish. They had all ruined their lives by being too sentimental. So forget it. Yet when Turban had dismissed his medical orderlies, he found himself wandering around one of the empty, twilit classrooms. The blackboards looked down blankly from the walls, the benches still stood in their ranks. He could not resist lifting the lid of one of the desks and sitting down at it. It felt difficult, awkward and uncomfortable. How near the blackboard seemed. He could have sworn that this was his old classroom, this or the next one, because there was that same familiar view of the city out of the window. Over there was the huge black, inert mass of the university buildings, there was the lamplit avenue running straight as an arrow, there were the same box-like houses, the dark gaps in between them, walls, the vaulted sky. Outside it looked exactly like a stage set for the night before Christmas, snow and little flickering, twinkling lights. I wonder why there is gunfire out at Sviatoshino? Harmless, far away, as though muffled in cotton wool, came the dull boom, boom. Enough of this. Alexei Turbin lowered the desk lid, walked out into the corridor and through the main lobby, past the sentries and out of doors. A machine gun was posted at the main entrance. There were hardly any people out on the streets and it was snowing hard. Hash. The colonel spent a busy night, making countless journeys back and forth between the school and Madame Anjou's shop nearby. By midnight the machinery of his command was working thoroughly and efficiently. Crackling faintly, the school arc lights shone with their pinkish light. The assembly hall had grown noticeably warmer, thanks to the fires blazing all evening and all night in the old-fashioned stoves in the library bays of the hall. Under Myshlayevsky's command several cadets had lit the white stoves with bound volumes of literary magazines of the 1860s, and then to a ceaseless clatter of axes had fed the flames by chopping up the old school benches. Having swallowed their ration of 2 glasses of vodka, the colonel had kept his promise and provided them with enough to keep the cold out, 1.5 gallons. Studzinski and Myshlayevsky took turns as officer of the guard. They slept for 2 hours, wrapped in their greatcoats, lying on the floor beside the stove with the cadets, the crimson flames and shadows playing on their faces. Then they got up, moving from sentry post to sentry post all through the night inspecting the guard. Relieved every hour, 4 cadets, muffled in sheepskin jerkins, stood guard over the broad-muzzled 6-inch mortars. The stove at Madame Anjou's glowed infernally, the draft roaring and crackling up the flue. A cadet stood on guard at the door keeping constant watch on the motorcycle and sidecar parked outside, while 4 others slept like logs inside the shop, wrapped in their greatcoats. Towards midnight the colonel was finally able to settle down at Madame Anjou's. He was yawning, but was still too busy on the telephone to go to sleep. Then at 2 o'clock in the morning a motorcycle drove hooting up to the shop. A military man in a gray coat dismounted. "Let him pass. It's for me." The man handed the colonel a bulky package wrapped in cloth, tied crisscross with wire. The colonel personally deposited it in the little safe at the back of the shop and locked it. The gray man drove off again on his motorcycle. The colonel mounted to the balcony, where he spread out his greatcoat and put a bundle of rags under his head. Having ordered the duty cadet to waken him at precisely 6:30 a.m., he lay down and went to sleep. Seven. The coal-black gloom of the darkest night had descended on the terraces of the most beautiful spot on earth, St. Vladimir's Hill, whose brick-paved paths and avenues were hidden beneath a thick layer of virgin snow. Not a soul in the city ever set foot on that great terraced mound in wintertime. Still less was anyone likely to climb the hill at night, especially at times like these, which were grim enough to deter the bravest man. There was no good reason for going there and only one place that was lit. For 100 years the black, cast-iron St. Vladimir has been standing on his fearful heavy plinth and holding, upright, a 20-foot-high cross. Every evening, as soon as twilight begins to enfold the snowdrifts, the slopes and the terraces, the cross is lighted and it burns all night. From far away it can be seen, from 30 miles away in the black distance stretching away towards Moscow. But here on the hilltop it lights up only very little. The pale electric light falls, brushing the greenish-black flanks of the plinth, picking out of the darkness the balustrade and a stretch of the railings that surround the central terrace.